holdouts on Masada were the last to fall. The Romans surrounded the place, starved it out, built ramps, and ultimately infested it after, and everyone committed suicide there, as was the style of the extreme resistors known as the Sicarii, but according to Josephus. Known as the Sicarii because of the knife they supposedly hid beneath their garments to assassinate their opponents. That's Josephus' view, but I don't agree that that's the reason that they were called Sicarii, and I don't think that they in fact called themselves that name, because that would be very pejorative. In other words, someone is calling them knife people. I don't think they called themselves the knife people. Anyway, I just had an argument or discussion with someone who was interested in Judas Iscariot, and the closest word to this that we've been able to find is this. In fact, you put the I, you reverse this, that's often done, it's even closer. And in Greek, this would be Sikarios, so it gets even closer. Is Judas supposed to, and the Sicarii, you have to, if you've read your Josephus carefully, was founded by a person called Judas. I think that the character in the Gospels is meant to caricature Judas, who founded the Sicarii movement. It's a caricature. Basically, the negative, I was talking to this fellow just today, the negative portrayal, he was trying to tell me that, Judas Iscariot was a thief and he misplaced the money of the community and did all these things. I said, well, I know the negative portrayal, that's fine. But the negative portrayal basically is, at that time, even though we don't know anymore who the Sicarii were to heap abuse on the Sicarii. People at that time would have understood what was being implied by that negative portrayal. And he misunderstood the teacher's message, and he betrayed the teacher, because the teacher was for peace, and for turning the other cheek, and for loving your enemy, and for getting along with Rome, where people like the Sicarii were for war and opposing Rome and killing people who didn't toe the line and were collaborators, and assassinating Roman officials like we're getting done in Iraq today, and so on. So I'm sure the writers of the Gospels knew all that, and therefore we don't know all that. And therefore we don't understand this undercurrent. We just take the superficial meaning. But when you take a class like this, you dig deeper in that. Jeff?
Do you think the Sicarii were the ones that were after Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure, the Sicarii were after Paul. That's why he hates them so much. And but I don't think the Sicarii. Noel just did a paper for me, helped me fill in the, put it on Word, where I didn't have it right, and she says the footnotes are messed up. But I can tell you how to get out of that footnote problem. Just look at the thing that footnote's supposed to relate to and see if that relates to that particular footnote. So you can easily sort those numbers out. If you just take a second and look in the book, what the footnote's supposed to be, you can see if that relates to that particular thing. That's another, I'd have to do that anyway. That's the way to do it. It's pretty easily sorted out. But the point, I wrote a paper on the Sicarii Essenes, because it turns out there's another version of Josephus in an early church father that's mentioned here by Eusebius. He was in the 200s in Rome, and he wrote a book on the heresies, and that book exists. Well, we're not sure if he really wrote it, but it's attributed to him. And he has a section on the Essenes, and he says there are 4 groups of Essenes, 2 of which are called Zealot Essenes and Sicarii Essenes. He doesn't distinguish between these two groups. And I feel that his insight into this period is actually better than the conventional Josephus, and that explains a lot, that the Sicarii Essenes were the Essenes willing to use violence. And there are peaceful Essenes and there are warlike Essenes. And the warlike Essenes are responsible, in my view, for the Dead Sea Scrolls, because the Dead Sea Scrolls, whatever they are not peaceful. And therefore people who think the peaceful Essenes could have written the Dead Sea Scrolls have to do a huge jump in order to try to say everything violent that they were talking about was only symbolic violence, which is clearly an untenable position. And Josephus even admits, if we look at his war carefully, that the Essenes participated in the war against Rome. And that they were, one person is known, a person called John the Essene, as a military commander of in the uprising. And how John the Essene differs from John the Christian, I would like that to be explained to me, honestly. And so Josephus tells us, even in the normative Josephus, that they participated in the uprising and that they were admired for the death that they were willing to die, and that you could torture them and do them all kinds of things to them which the Romans did, and they would not blaspheme the Creator, as Josephus puts it, or willing to eat forbidden food. So they certainly were not like the New Testament presents things in terms of dietary regulations not being enforced. So much were they enforced that these people were willing to go to the death rather than eat forbidden foods like pork or stuff like that. So these Sicarii Essenes, as Hippolytus calls them, are the extreme Essenes. And he says there are different groups of Essenes. And I think that that's accurate. And that helps. And all scholars work in this field never even look at Hippolytus. I've never met one scholar, I don't know, you've looked at books, I know, I don't think you've ever, one scholar who even refers to Hippolytus. I don't think you will find it, Liam. So this is how, the breadth of knowledge of the people who write. I know people say, well, this book tells me this, Professor Eisenman. Yeah, but you're not aware that this book is only going this far and is only using these sources and has not gone that far. And I happen to be aware of that. And so to tell me what so-and-so says in his book really tells me almost nothing. Because we got a lot of people who just are followers in this field and very few people who set out on their own. So the fact that the Sicarii, as you're talking about, would be after Paul. If the Sicarii are a branch of the Essenes, then the Sicarii Essenes were after Paul. And I think they were, because of his teaching about the law. It's quite clear what their issue is with him. And in fact, Josephus, or Hippolytus, says that these Sicarii Essenes would go so far that if they heard someone discussing the law who was not circumcised, and I'm not saying circumcised is the be-all and end-all, but it is the mark of the covenant that you honor the law of Moses, because that's the sign of the covenant, good or bad. I'm not saying that's very edifying and exciting sign of the covenant to cut someone's foreskin off. I'm not, but it was a common practice in Egyptian times, and it's gone from Judaism into Islam and so on. It's become a sign of some sort of social status, let's say, in those days. And they took it and maybe